Hello and welcome to Kumza Africa Amplified, reverberating across Africa and beyond. It is a pleasure to have you along with us here in this episode of Kumza Africa Amplified, wherever you are on the continent. In this episode, I am in conversation with Professor Rajen Pillay. He is my guest as we talk about the progress that has been made here on the continent with regard to the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. He will also be talking to us about matters pertaining to the G20 and the G20's impact on the African continent, as well as the important matters relating to Brics. He will be telling us all about it here on this special episode of Kumza Africa Amplified. Professor Rajen Pillay, thank you so much for joining us. It is a pleasure to have you on Kumza Africa Amplified.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Nice to have me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us here. Before we go any further, Prof, because there's so much to cover, you have seen it all, isn't it, Prof?
A lot, and I'm still witnessing more.
Yeah.
Every day, yes.
Talk to me about Garuda Capital, the company that you are running at the moment. What does Garuda Capital do?
Yeah, we're a specialist corporate finance house. So if there's a large project which requires financing or capital raising, then clients come to us to structure the transaction and to raise the capital. So there's basically any amount of capital that's available floating around, but there's not enough suitably structured projects to be able to access the funding. So clients come to us to structure their transaction and to raise the capital. So we're a small boutique M&A organization, and we specialize in complex transactions.
So in other words, you are the middleman, the financial intermediary, if you like?
Yes, yeah. So we are non-banking financial intermediaries. We intermediate between clients on the one hand and finance houses and investors on the other hand. So we match projects with the pools of liquidity and pools of money that's available. Very often people have large projects and they don't know where to go to raise the money.
Yeah.
Or they go to traditional funders like banks, and the banks may be skeptical or not so keen. But the project has to go ahead. So eventually project owners find us and we help them along the road to raise the capital for their projects. We generally look at transactions over 100 million rand, about $5-6 million at the small end.
Yeah.
And some of our largest transactions have been up to 9.3 billion rand, about $700 million.
It's interesting, Prof, that you are saying that there is so much money floating around, so much capital floating around.
Yes, there is. There's plenty of capital that's available.
Yeah.
And a project should never fail because of lack of capital. But projects do fail, and they don't see the light of day simply because the promoters or the owners don't have the right team to make the right level of presentation, which could be of interest to funders. So every funder has peculiar requirements, specific requirements, and if you don't meet those requirements, you're going to have no chance to raise the funding. So when we approach the market, we know exactly what particular criteria funders are looking for. So when clients often go to, let's say they go to a bank, the bank turns them away. They come back to us, we repackage the same proposal and take it to the same bank and get it across. So it's a presentation of a project, it's how you present it, and there are certain skills and attributes which need to be there for funders to give you the green light.
But how do you manage so many challenges that come with the kind of work that you do? Because I can imagine there is a lot that you have to contend with, especially looking at the expectations that you have to manage during this process as well.
Yes, precisely, because invariably people try the big finance houses, and they either don't receive, they probably don't receive the correct attention from those institutions, and they get thrown out. But the project has to continue, so people continue in their search. They find us, and we help them to put unique, attractive parts to it that make the whole project not more viable, but more appealing. And we also, from the funder's perspective, we help them to identify the risk and mitigate the risk. So when we submit the proposal, the funder says, here's an attractive proposal, but I think that's going to be a problem. I think that's going to be a problem. When they look at our information memorandum, they see that we highlight it and we tell them how to mitigate the risk. So then they feel more comfortable and they feel safe and they say, okay, fine, let's look at it in a bit more detail. And that's what you want them to do. Eventually they get across to liking the whole proposal and say, right, now we'll give you a green light, a green tick, we'll do it. We'll do it. And that's what the project owners want to see. But they invariably don't have the team or the expertise or the experience to put that kind of stuff together.
Any big project that you can pinpoint and say, when I look back at that particular project, that should be one of the key highlights?
We'd like to think that we have one of the cleverest corporate finance teams in the country. And we certainly know that because the institutions come and poach our people. So people may not know Garuda Capital, but the institutions do know us and they respect our work. So these transactions are typically very challenging. One of the largest that we've done was Prime Media. I said it's about $700 million. We spent about 8 months for a client. I traveled to Hong Kong, New York. We raised the money.
You spent 8 months
during
the whole process.
That's how long these transactions can take. This one was a big one and it was quite complex. So we did raise the money, but we had a nagging suspicion that the transaction advisors, when they first brought the transaction to the market, that they were testing the market to see if they will get their price or not. We had that feeling, and I asked the institution, please don't let us do all this work and then take the asset off the market. So we spent about 8 months. We successfully raised the money. And then the institution came back and told us, no, it's okay, they'll keep the asset. So these things do happen, and you have to be able to live through it. It's called a nasty shock.
Of course. I think that talks to the kind of journey that you have traveled, Prof, isn't it? Because like I said earlier on, your journey dates back to many, many years ago. And at some point, I think you were the first black stockbroker in the 80s. Is that perhaps what laid the foundation for your business career?
Yes, very much. The propensity to take risk, to propensity to come up with creative solutions. And now where we position ourselves is that people find us when they have a difficult problem. So we are not interested in run-of-the-mill kind of transactions. If it's complex, if it requires some what we call special intervention or special skills, then you come to us and we'll help you. I can give you an example. For example, the lottery license was to be allocated in South Africa. It's run by the Department of Trade and Industry. They ran an RFP process for 18 months. Nothing to do with Garuda Capital. It was running independently. So they identified the number 1 bidder and the number 2 bidder. They went through the lotteries board, and the lotteries board had a hung decision. 4 of the board members voted for the existing guy, and 4 of the board members voting for the new player. So there was a split decision. The chairman, of course, was clever enough not to use his voting vote, his casting vote. And he called us, Garuda Capital, to say, please come and assist him. In the end, we advised the Minister of Trade and Industry, Dr. Davies at the time, on the lottery. Our findings were that both number 1 and number 2 were actually disqualified in terms of the RFP. But then the Minister said, they couldn't afford to waste more time. Can we please make a recommendation as to be the best alternative? And we did. And we're very pleased to advise that the ministers went with our recommendations and duly appointed the new operator.
That's fantastic.
So that's a bit of background information, which we don't generally talk about.
You don't talk about it, but your impact, Prof, has been felt across the African continent and beyond as well, like we are saying. When you look at the state of intra-Africa trade, Prof, because so much is being said about the fact that, not much is happening in terms of intra-Africa trade. When you assess the intra-Africa trade, what comes to mind?
Well, when we assess intra-Africa trade, the first thing that comes to mind is that the political control over the various economies, which is largely historical and historical based. So you have French Africa, you have Portuguese Africa, you have English Africa, you have, of course, the language constraints around that. But then our colonial masters previously encouraged us to deal with Europe and America, etc. So inter-Africa trade wasn't high on the agenda. In South Africa, where I was born, where I come from, we were not viewed as part of Africa. The old South Africa, we were viewed as part of Europe and not of Africa. So there was very little integration. Now there's moves to unleash the joint economies by collaborating amongst African economies. There's more focus on that. But these colonial mindsets take a long, long time to overcome. And now what we've got to do is to create the physical infrastructure to facilitate the Pan-African trade.
Yes.
So that physical infrastructure wasn't built on. It now needs to be built on. So we need to have the transport corridors, the railway corridors, and the airline connectivity, for example. Very often, even now, inter-African trade, you got to fly from one African country to another. You fly via Europe. It sounds ludicrous, but that's where we're at.
Unbelievable.
Yes. But now I think there is a realization that Pan-African trade is the right market to be focusing on. But there's a number of significant barriers that exist. For example, if you had to move a container of cargo from Zimbabwe or Zambia and you want to export to China, it's one route, you put it on one truck. But it's between 16 to 20 different sets of documents that need to be filled in. That can't be conducive to...
That is a laborious process.
It's laborious, it's time-consuming, and extremely frustrating. Extremely frustrating. So the hope is that we can get freer trade, freer movement of goods, freer movement of people. But of course, it comes with challenges, and not every country is at the same level of preparation, even emotionally or mentally, in terms of sovereignty issues, etc., etc. So different countries view things differently, and it's going to take a big push.
You spoke about the issue of infrastructure. That infrastructure has to be put in place to make sure that this integration happens without any problems. But the private sector has got a key role to play as well, to make sure that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement works. But is the private sector coming to the party here?
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately not, and certainly not to the extent that we require them to. I think where there's direct bilateral trade, then private sector is heavily involved, and business people want to see the profit. So they do see the profit, but when it comes to multilateral trade, where there's 2 or 3 countries involved, then the private sector tend to shy away
Yeah.
because of the complexities and the timelines to get to satisfactory positions.
Yeah.
And they find that dealing with governments is laborious, it's time consuming, and it may take you a long time, especially if there's 2 or 3 countries involved. If it's one-on-one bilateral, that generally works a bit better.
Yeah.
But if it's you're passing over several territories or several corridors,
Yeah.
private sector doesn't have the appetite, the time, or the patience to engage with these kind of state entities who typically don't have a quick turnaround time, and that's I think part of the explanation. There would be more to it, but at the top level, that would be a quick answer to it.
Sure. What about the regional economic communities? What role are they supposed to be playing?
This is something that I raised at the last conference that I chaired. We have the regional economic communities, and these have been there for the last 20, 30, 40 years, and they have established rules and governance. So what it implies is that if you want the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to apply, it means that those regional economies need to be split up, dismembered, and actually destroyed to make way for the new thing. Now, when you want to destroy existing regulations and existing ways of doing business, it always meets with resistance.
Yeah, because these regional bodies have been in existence for
a long time.
Long time.
That's right.
It's not going to be easy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be simple, and nobody willingly tears down their house to build a new house.
Yeah.
So those are issues which, again, are historic.
Talk to me about the impact of Brics when it comes to continental integration here on the continent.
Well, again, I think Brics is a very significant global movement.
Yeah.
And there's roots to it and there's reasons for it. But with all of these global type transactions, it always takes longer than expected. So the reasoning might be there, and the purposes and the fundamental drivers might be there for Brics, for example, but it does take a lot of time for consensus to be reached. And currently, Brics is now called Brics Plus.
Yes.
So it was originally the 6 members, and then they added 2 or 3, and now there's several more, and that list is growing daily. So whilst it's a good thing, you might understand getting consensus from 4 members might be a lot easier getting consensus than 24 members. So expanding the body does have attraction, but it does tend to slow you down in other areas. So I think Brics is a good alternative for emerging economies, for developing countries. Because we know the issues with developing economies vis-a-vis the developed world, mainly the Western countries. You mentioned the US, for example. They want to see development, but development which suits their own interest, quite naturally and quite understandably. So I think Brics is trying to reduce the reliance on Western domination and allow developed economies to trade amongst themselves, trade more effectively, and perhaps on better terms. So that's the broad idea behind Brics. It's made a start, and I think they've probably got a bit more traction currently than the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So there's a lot more happening at Brics than the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, although that might change and that might improve, and we're hopeful that, by way of an economic union, the African Union is going to be the largest. But if you look at the European Union, it took more than 17 years to actually materialize. So these things are complex by nature, There's a lot of sovereignty issues. There's a lot of particular specific political agendas that need to be met. And then, of course, the common currency. So I think to achieve a free trade area is going to be the quicker part of it. But the common currency is going to be a long, long way off from that.
When you hear stories about de-dollarization, what is your view with regards to that?
Well, the view is, again, it's the one of the founding concepts of the Brics group of countries.
Yeah.
Is that trading amongst themselves should be in a more pleasant way, in a less controlled way. And the dollar has been a mighty dollar. I think history will show that an alternative may come about in due course, but it's still a long way off. And it might be a good development, but it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of fancy political work, because of various implications. You've heard Mr. Trump make several threats.
Tariff threats.
So that's going to be there, and no one says that they don't have a right to say what they want to say, given the position that they occupy. But the world is evolving. And to say that at one time people used to say that the pound, the UK pound, was the mighty pound, and that was the currency for the world. That changed. And now it's the dollar. It might go to the yen, it might go to any other currencies. Things do move and things do evolve. So for any particular administration to think it's going to remain fixed and constant, that's not how history works.
But do you think the idea of a digital currency for BRICS members, is that feasible?
Yes, it is feasible, and various some of the central banks are looking at that fairly carefully. The Chinese have big teams on it. The Russians have a good team, as is India. So I think every large trading nation, their reserve bank does have a propensity to look into digital currencies as a conversion mechanism to ease and facilitate trade. And I think that will receive more and more attention. And something will come out of it. I think probably first on a bilateral kind of basis, and then on a multilateral kind of basis. Because there's big rules that need to be put into place to govern everyone's actions, what's acceptable, what's not. So those ground rules have to be set. And I think they're being looked at currently.
Talk to me about your responsibilities, your role as the chairperson of the BRICS FinTech division. What exactly do you do?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because currently we're caught very much between the dollar and the de-dollarization processes. Throughout the world, there's something called the SWIFT bank settlements, interbank, intercountry, etc. That's how the world has typically evolved. And now there's discussions. I think it was politically sensitive to say de-dollarization, and some countries might have preferred to use that terminology. But the big developing economies like China and India are not saying de-dollarization. They're not saying it, but there's definitely significant moves for alternative trading mechanisms and trading patterns. So in South Africa, I head the team here for the banking and fintech. So we obviously have a lot of discussion with the Ministry of Finance, with the regulatory authorities, the Reserve Bank, and with international relations, DIRCO, etc., because there's political impact, there's economic impact. But we essentially deal with the backroom mechanisms and the policy directives to be able to get these things going. The political people say what they want to say, how they want to say it, but at the end of the day, you've got to run a country. which runs according to banking systems, and there's prudence, and there's conservatism, and you got to exercise a fair amount of caution when you're playing with the country's wallet.
You spoke about something called SWIFT.
Yes.
Payment system.
Yeah.
I know that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, one of the key recommendations has been the issue of the payment system here that is being applied here on the continent as well. Can you talk to us about that kind of a payment system and how it is going to help in terms of buttressing development across the continent?
Yeah, you see, the fundamental issue with trade is that the parties have got to be what we call sanitized.
Yeah.
And you've got to use a system which is reliable, dependable, and foolproof, fail-proof. Nobody can put money into a bank and then the bank collapses or the economic system collapses. You want to be able to get your money out, especially if you're putting your money into a bank to transfer across the border to purchase goods. You want to be able to buy your goods, make the payment. The person who's delivering the goods needs to make sure he gets his money.
Yeah.
The person who's put the money needs to make sure he gets his goods. So the payment mechanism is absolutely fundamental and crucial to Pan-African trade. The issue is that there's different databases that's involved. There's different banks that are involved. There's different corporate governance policies between banks and lenders. Sometimes you get a guarantee from a bank, and depending on who the bank is, you can just look at it and say, this is of value or it's of no value. So these are the kind of things which go to the heart of trade and payment systems. So what we're trying to do essentially is to get everybody up to the same level of compliance, of disclosure, recording, and financial security. So you can imagine that there's 300 banks on the African continent. They all run differently. And not every bank is the same as the other.
The same, yeah.
So we need to ensure standardization, corporate governance, adherence to rules and regulations, and proper fiduciary controls. That's what we're basically trying to get. And I think we're making some progress on that. The SWIFT system is based on the interconnection between, let's say, banking between Botswana and South Africa, as an example, or Botswana and Malawi.
Yeah.
So that's an interface through correspondent banking relationships. But at the end of the day, you're subject to the banking strength or weakness of South Africa and the banking strength or weakness of Botswana, for example. The two players on either end have got to be matched in terms of financial security, financial strength, corporate governance, policies, etc. And that's the only way you can actually legitimately allow trade to happen and to move ahead. Because every time you have a letter of credit being opened, you can't say, can I ship my goods? What if the LC is not going to be met?
So there has to be a synergy between the banking institutions.
Very much so, yes.
Across the board.
Yes.
But talking about the banking institutions, what about the African Development Bank? What kind of impact is it having?
Well, the African Development Bank is having a significant impact. And I needed to add also the new Brics Bank, Brics Development Bank, is also doing a fair amount of lending. But they primarily in what we would call non-retail banking, so more along infrastructure kind of projects, large projects, national projects, like roads or harbors and that kind of stuff. So not retail banking per se, but they are able to come in as a funder for several what we call strategic projects. And yes, they're having an impact. I was the chairman of Transnet some time back, a few weeks back. And Transnet, as you know, with several of the state-owned entities, the SOEs, are having difficulty in the banking facilities. And the new development bank, the Brics Bank, gave them a credit line of about 6 billion rand, for example. Now, those are the kind of things that we want to encourage and see happen. Because sometimes the banking systems are unduly pessimistic or unduly conservative, which is not good for national development or developmental economics. So these DFIs, as you referred to them, the African Development Bank and the Brics Bank, are going to be trying to focus on unblocking some of those impediments like infrastructure, transport corridors, transport hubs, inland ports, seaports, for example, all of which is required for moving volumes of cargo. So yes, there is a place.
Prof, let's talk about the role of the G20. We know that South Africa has assumed the presidency of the G20, and this is going to have a massive impact here on not only on South Africa, but across the African continent. What can you tell us about what to expect as South Africa assumes the presidency of this global forum?
Well, precisely. I think it's very exciting. The bodies that we are involved in at Brics and the G20 and the various departments of economy and finance are very attractive, very excited by this.
Yeah.
We think it gives Africa, and not just South Africa, but Africa, a window of opportunity. And there's a big movement now to get the G20 going fairly constructively. Our view, and to answer the question in very broad terms, I would say it would lead to a more focus on Africa, economic focus and business focus, by the economic giants, which is what we want. So we could expect more American interest, perhaps, certainly more Chinese interest, and maybe some Indian economic activity, more enhanced economic activity. So I think, again, from what I started off with, it's up to Africa to present its investment case properly. So we are fortunate in that the G20 is coming here. The focus of the world will be on South Africa and on Africa. It's up to us now to be able to mobilize that and translate it into proper projects. Even if it's 4 or 5 large projects, we can attract it. But if you don't do the work, the preparatory work, the money is not going to fall out of the sky.
So there needs to be a lot of cooperation. We have to speak in one voice as the African continent going into these important discussions, Prof. But it's not going to be easy, as you say.
Yeah, because there's a lot of competing projects, there's competing countries. And at the end of the day, the Chinese don't want to hear, oh, look at this project and look at that project and look at that. They want to say, look at this one, make it happen. Look at that one, make it happen. So you prioritize 2 or 3, which calls for cooperation and working together. Prioritize 2 or 3. Then you say to the Chinese, these are what we want to happen, and it must happen. And guaranteed there will be movement and there will be progress. Because now the economic powers, the global economic powers, are not just seeing Africa as they used to, as a milking pot for just extracting materials, etc. They see a bigger role for Africa. But Africa has to rise to the challenge and say, how can they get involved? For example, Zimbabwe has got lithium and all these things which go into batteries and stuff like that. Instead of exporting the minerals, make the battery.
It's an important point.
Add the value.
Yes, add value.
But somebody in these countries need to pick it up into a viable project, to make it viable, to say, support this project. Not we have it, come and take it.
Are you optimistic that the continent is on the right track?
Very much so, with certain regional zones lagging behind, but other zones forging ahead. Economic prosperity has got to come to our people. It's got to come to Africa at some stage. Regrettably, there have been a few maladvised individuals and political missions at play, which you can expect, which has tend to held back economic development. But economic development is coming. I think if you look at electrification, if you look at the amount of kilometers of tarred roads, if you look at all the metrics, Africa is progressing. Still a long way to go, but we are progressing.
As we wind up this conversation, Prof, you have once said that the biggest mistake people are making is to withdraw completely from all activities, whether work or social, when they retire. What made you say those words, Prof?
It's not given too easily, and it's not taken very easily. But yes, you cannot withdraw. I think as long as you are breathing and you have movement, you need to continue moving. And if you cannot move at the same pace, you can reduce from a full day's work to half a day's work. And that way all your systems continue to function, and you get more longevity, and you contribute perhaps in a different way, but you are still relevant and you still have a place. But when you retire in front of your couch and your TV, then you become a consumer and not a contributor. And there's nothing particularly good that's going to come out of you or from you. So the idea is to always reimagine yourself, reposition yourself, and recreate yourself according to changing biological cycles, time cycles, age cycles. Everything goes in cycle, in tides.
Reinvent yourself.
Reinvent yourself. There's always a scope for that. And some studies were done at university that in Japan, for example, people join companies and they work their entire life in the same company. In Europe, it's 3 years or 5 years. And then you change a job. So if one goes back and trace your own career, myself as well. I mean, I started off my career as an accountant, and then I went into banking. And then I became the first black stockbroker in South Africa. But now I'm in finance. So eventually you find your calling. You find your preferred space in life. And the trick to it is to, whatever you're doing, you could be a plumber, you could be an anesthetist, you could be a road sweeper. The trick to the entire thing is to do whatever you're doing properly, to the best of your ability. So if somebody's sweeping my front porch, I got to go back to them and say, well done, you cleaned that well, you did a good job. Well done. That's what you're looking for.
Did it properly,
You don't. Everyone doesn't have to be a rocket scientist, or a heart surgeon, or a financier. But whatever you do, focus on it. Get it right. Do it properly. People will call you back and say, "Can you do it again for me?" That's being successful.
What is next for you personally and for Garuda Capital?
For me, I haven't written any books. So when I was
why not, Prof?
When I'm reserving the period after 80 to write books. But for me, I haven't written any books, but I would like to leave a legacy. And if people can know me as the person who brought Brics into South Africa or into Africa, and made it work and got it going, that's a good enough achievement, I think. So next steps is what I call a legacy project. And that's for mutual benefit, for country benefit, for African benefit, not necessarily for your business or to suit your pocket or any of those things. So that's where I'm looking at.
Prof. Rajen Pillay, it has been such a pleasure having you here exclusively to Kumza Africa Amplified. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much. And there you have it. That's a Professor Rajen Pillay here, a renowned finance specialist joining me exclusively to Kumza Africa Amplified as we talk about continental matters. I hope you have enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. If you like the content, simply subscribe, like, and share. Until next time, it's goodbye for now. Cheers.